Alright guys, TFC here. I know it's been a while, but well, life gets in the way and all that. Alright, so today we'll be doing some advanced texturing techniques. I know a lot of you have been looking forward to this one, so I've tried to do my best. Take a look at the gameplay in the background. That's what we're going to cover in this video. So it is a long one, but you really do get out what you put in with texturing. For example, I've spent probably a few days recording this. I've sped up a bunch of sections so that if you want to watch, it's not really going to drag on. But it gives you the foundations of what I normally do. So I think the results that I get here are pretty good. And these are my normal techniques. But what I might do extra on top of this is just spend some time using the same techniques, but just do more and more until I get to a point where I'm really happy. I guess my point is it's up to you how much you do. But the more time you put into it, definitely the better the end product will look. Alright, so I'm going to break texturing down into a few sections in this video. We're going to start with setting up an image and using the texture brush in L3DT, which is a really useful tool. So I'm then going to update the Heightmap to match what we've done with the texture brush. And now this is a great technique because you get to sync up the Heightmap with the textures at the same time, and the result is pretty much perfect every time. So I'm then going to update the masks images, and I'm going to export the Heightmap so you've got the new masks and the new Heightmap together, and then we'll check it out in game. We're then going to be looking at adjusting the repeating tiles and the normals. We're going to make them look better, and then we're going to do some finishing touches on the masks at the end of the video. So like I've said, I've sped up the work parts. And as usual, you'll find an index in the description with clickable links to different sections in case you want to skip these and just move straight on to the next bit where I'm talking. Alright, so let's get on with it. So heading over to L3DT, you can see we've got the height map and this texture map which we made, which was kind of like a layer of masks over the top of the actual satellite image. So we had a really good idea of what was going on. We're going to do pretty similar kind of thing to this, but because this time we want to be able to see more of what the texture is coming through, we're going to use this satellite image that we originally captured along with our grass mask, which is right here. We're going to copy that, Control C. We're going to go to our satellite image, and I'm going to go Edit, Paste as, New Layer in Place. That's going to make a new layer for it, but it's going to put it in exactly the right position because the two images are both the same resolution. And what that is basically our grass mask sitting on top of the satellite image, which we can lower the opacity on, and we can see, kind of like the grass underneath. Exactly what's going on with that. So basically what we want to do right here is we want to kind of refine the grass mask and exactly where it is, where it's going to sit, how far it comes up to the edges of the track and all that kind of good stuff. So we need to kind of figure out a good opacity that will allow us to not only see the mask but also see what's going on beneath it. So I reckon somewhere about there. Alright, so I'm going to go File, Export As, and our first one was this one, Majora L3DT _TX, and I'm just going to add on the end of that grass mask just so we know what it is and we can import it easy enough. So export that. We're going to go to L3DT, we're going to go File, Import, Texture Map, Overwrite, and I'm going to pick this one right here, Grass Mask. Okay, so now if we go to Texture, Height Field Editor 3D, and I go View Textured, so we can see the grass there, where the grass is going to show up in game. And I'm also going to turn off the shading, so go Options to Options Lighting, Runtime Lighting over Texture. I'm going to turn that off. That'll make moving around, navigating a lot easier, a lot quicker and more responsive. Alright, so before we can draw onto this directly, which is what we will be doing, we first need to make an attributes map. And the reason for that is it won't let you draw onto the map directly until you've generated one, even though we're not going to use one. So if I go Tools, Texture Map Brush 3D, which is what we want to use, it says please generate the attributes map. So we can't do it without doing that. And to do that, really straightforward. Once it's done its thing, you just go to Operations, Attributes Map, Generate. And it doesn't really matter which one you pick from the climates. What it's going to do is it's going to kind of generate surface types for your height map. So for example, if it finds a flat area, it's going to generate a grass area for it. If it finds a steep area, it might generate a rock surface for it. Like I said, we're not going to use it, but it does need to be done in order to get the access to the texture map brush. Alright, so that's the attributes map, which we don't want. So go back to texture map. And now we're going to go Tools, Texture Map Brush 3D. And you'll find yourself back in this view with the same kind of tool set. But this time we've got TX brush tools. Now this is quite cool if you just want to generate an image, for whatever reason, and instead of kind of like the masks that we'll be using in MX Bikes, you can choose from all these different climates which have different textures within them. So for example, Mars, land type, flatland, and then you can draw. As you would adjust the height map, use the height map tools. We don't want to do that because our mask is white. What I find easiest for me anyway, and like I said before, you guys do what you want to do, but I'll choose Arctic. I'll pick land type snow. I'll pick pattern solid. You can have spray can. Spray can's a little bit, it lets a lot of the ground through beneath it, the surface type that it's discovered when making the attributes map. So I tend to stick to solid. And what that will allow us to do is to basically draw white onto the texture map. We can copy that out into GIMP, and we can pick some of that white and add it to the mask, or use it to mark areas that we want to exclude from the mask. Basically whatever we want to do with it, but it's a very useful thing to be able to do to get textures real tight up to the edge of jumps and stuff like that. So for example, right here, this tabletop right here, you've got grass all the way up to the edge of it, although it might be a little bit patchy, and you've got kind of like a path here on the side, the edge of the track where there is no grass. So what I'd probably go about doing right here is get the snow like we've got, and then simply just draw all the way up to the very edge where we want it. It's kind of invaluable being able to do this, because if you were to do this in a paint program, using the height map as a template, just kind of guessing where the edges of things are, you wouldn't know what it looked like until you got it in game. Whereas right here, I can see, for example, I've overlapped that bit there a little bit, which I don't want to do. So I can undo it, and I can try again until I get it right. So what I'm going for on this one is, when viewed from this angle right here, I don't want to see any of that grass. So I need it right on the edge, and to do that I might need to just stick that the shading on, just so I can see, there we go, exactly where the edge of that jump is. So you don't want to make it too big, because if you do, it will start letting through some of the texture from the surface type that it's discovered for this, like when we made the attributes map brush. If you make it too big, it starts letting some of that creep in, as you can see at the bottom there. So keep it relatively small, go in manageable little steps to get exactly what you want. Okay, so that's looking pretty spot on, right on the edge, and if I'm facing it from this direction, I won't be able to see any of that. If I'm looking from the side on, we'll have grass on the side of the jump, which is probably quite close to what it is in real life. It's definitely what I'm going for right here. So do your best to work around the track, painting the texture where you want the texture to appear. And you can also find a way of cutting some of that texture out if you want to do that as well. So there's two ways you can do that. You can either load this back up and use the white to mask the areas that you don't want, or you can find a different texture from the land types that you might decide actually you should be able to pick fairly easily in GIMP away from this and use as a method of cutting away from the mask. So basically what I'm going to do in GIMP after this is I'm going to just select all the white and copy it off the image, and then we can use that to add or subtract onto the mask that we've already got. Alright, well let's continue doing this additional stuff for now, and then we will worry more about what we want to leave off afterwards. Alright, so I'm going to use this technique and go all the way around my track, and I'm going to pick all the areas that I want the grass to show, and I'll speed that footage up so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. One thing it's worth noting, which you'll see me doing if you watch the video, is I'm overlapping the areas. So for example, the areas where the grass kind of thins out and we end up with this kind of patchy grass, we're actually going to adjust for that in GIMP, not here. So I want as much grass as possible over that area because we're going to make that patchy, like I say, in GIMP. And it's also not that important to go over areas like this where we already have grass. Though if you come to some of these corners and you think, you know, that could do with a neaten, a tidy up, then by all means go over the corners, because this is all going to add towards the quality of our mask that we end up with. right on the right hand side of this track, where you've got this kind of wooded area, it's going to be very hard to figure out from the satellite image what's actually going on with the tracks in that section. So I'm going to leave that relatively plain, and probably do just some patchy grass with some trees. But there is definitely a very clear path running along the right hand side. It's kind of hard to tell where that begins, because in fact, here we go, look, so you've got a path going all the way around the top. I'm forgetting this kind of mountain bike snake run thing, what's going on in the background, but you have a path running all the way around the top there, coming down, and that sticks to the start of the wooded area, and it looks to go all the way down to the bottom. So first of all, I'm going to need to do some more height map work, because this whole section here looks like it needs to drop a couple of meters. But there's nothing to stop us actually putting the path in now, and the reason that that's a good idea now is because we can then use that textured image that we're going to create from this to actually adjust the height map and sort some of these paths out off track, because when we know where the texture is going to be, it makes it a lot easier to adjust the height map to make the height map and the texture perfectly aligned. So to do that, I'm going to go to the climate on my texture brush. Alright, so we're going to go for Spring Green World FA Grass. And this is going to give us a real contrast between the white here that we're using and the green grass that we're going to use over the top. And that will allow us to separate these colours in GIMP and actually use them in one image for two different things. Alright, so that's kind of plotted out some paths, which I hope now becomes kind of clear what I've done there. And it also gives us some textures we can use for our masks. So what I'm going to do now is go Tools, Height Field Editor. I'm going to go View Textured, so we can now adjust our height map based on what we're seeing right here. And I'm going to make some adjustments using some of the techniques that we've already talked about to kind of adjust the height map based around some of these areas that we've marked off. So for example, here's a really good one. This is kind of like a bit of an access path, and because it's not grass, the green is not grass, yeah, it's going to be at slightly different level to everything else around it. So I'm going to set on my bulldozer to 0 on slope width and offset, and I'm going to click and just kind of start eating away at this area. Not too much, but what we want to do is offset it from the grass around it, the grass being white, if you imagine that that is our grass mask. And the most important thing that we're doing right here is really leveling it, because nothing's going to make it look more like a path than if it's flat. Alright, so all we've done there is kind of decimate out a little bit of a path structure to this stretch of path. It doesn't take long to do, but it really will make a bit of a difference to how it looks. So I'm just going to get the smooth, put it on really low, and just give that a quick once over. I'm going to turn the end cycles up on the smooth because I want to create more of a slope towards the path. Just be very careful when you go up to the very edge that you don't cut away too much of the transition between the path and the grass, because if you do, you're going to end up with kind of blurry lumps in game. For example, the side of this track right here, this jump right here, I want it to be a little bit more of a gradual slope, so I'm going to do something a bit more like that to get it there. Just go slow and steady. That's really more what I wanted to see. Right there. Okay, now this bit right here, I'm going to smooth this before I do any of the edges. What I want to be very careful of is that I don't eat away at the track path itself, so I'm going to get the bulldozer tool, and I'm just going to neaten up this edge right here to make sure it's definitely flat, like that. And I'm just going to smooth that on the inside before I do any of that slope. And what I don't want is I don't want to drag any of the track down with it. So if you go back up to the top here, you can see that so far the track is pretty much unaffected. So I want to make sure that I don't go any higher than this ridge right along the edge here. So kind of like that. If I go back to the top here, you can see the track path. It's pretty good. I'm just going to bring it out a little bit more as well, just to make sure. Just like that. Now I'm going to turn my smooth back down. Create a bit of a defined edge like that. That's exactly what I want. Then I can start bringing this side down as well. I'm going to leave the end cycles on about 3. Just very carefully butt up against the bottom of the path there, just like that. Now you want to do this in small steps, because if you do too much and then you make a mistake, you're going to have to undo and you're going to lose all your work. So you want to do this in very small. See, like right there. Start a bit higher, come down until you just catch the top. And just smooth it along. I think right there should probably do. Now this bit right here, this kind of off-track bit here, I'm going to turn my end cycles up to 6 again, and I'm just going to go a bit slower over this to try and flatten it out because it's a little bit lumpy at the moment. Okay, I actually think right here we're going to end up with some bleeding, so I'm just going to adjust, get the bulldozer, I'm just going to adjust the width of this bit of path. Something like that should work a lot better. What we don't want is to see too much of that green being dragged up the side of the hill when you smooth it off. It's okay if you get a little bit here and there, but on the whole, if you have tons of it, it's going to look really out of place when we transfer this to our mask. So right there, give yourself a little bit of leeway, and that should give us plenty of room to play with. So let's go and have another go at smoothing that. Alright, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what I normally do for paths. As you can see, it's flattened it off. It's given it a bit of distinction between the path surface and the grass surface off track. It's going to look really good when viewed from the track flying around. Although I know the aim of this isn't to make the off track look amazing, it's really more about the track design itself. But like I said earlier, off track really does play a big part into kind of drawing you in and making the atmosphere feel like a replica. So I'm going to go around, I'm just going to do the other paths using the same method that I've just done there. I'm also going to seriously lower this whole area because it's way too high up. So I'll speed that up and I will see you back here when I'm done. Alright, so hopefully what we've got here is we've got a real nice template we can use. It's got all the grass laid out, it's got all the paths laid out. We're actually now going to have to export a couple of things. First of all, we've made quite a lot of changes to the height map by compensating for these paths and roads, as you can see. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to export this. File, export, active map layer, choose the format raw, same as before, and overwrite our height map. If you ever want to make a backup of your last one, what I sometimes do is I'll rename my height map backup or something like that, and then I'll just save as heightmap.raw. We don't need to change any of the other settings, so OK that. So now our height map has been exported. What we then need to do is we need to export our texture map. So we go to our texture map tab. We're going to go File, Export, Active Map Layer, because that's the one we're looking at. And we're going to choose, I'm going to choose PNG, and we're going to call it Masks TB for Texture Brush, and save that. We're going to leave that at 2048, because that's the size of our masks and textures. And we're going to go Export. Alright, so we're going to go into GIMP, and I'm just going to open from our Majora folder I'm going to open masks underscore TB, and this is what we have. So basically what we're doing here is we've got the white, which is going to be where the grass is, and we've got the green where we want to cut away from that grass. The white areas are going to add to our already existing grass mask. Now remember, this one was real rough, it was just a general idea. What I've done here using the texture brush is what I typically do every time I make a track. Okay, so in order to select the white areas, I'm going to get the select by color tool. Might have to mess around with the take feather edges off. We might have to mess around with the threshold to get this to select the parts that we want, and we might get some unwanted parts as well. Like for example, we're getting these buildings in over here. That's okay. They're really easy to get rid of. But on the whole, what it's doing is it's selecting just these white areas. So what I'm going to do is copy that, make it invisible. I'm going to paste it as a new layer, and I'm just going to get rid of all the stuff like this that we don't want. And I think that's probably about it. So as you can see, it's still got this kind of really bad seamless snow texture that L3DT used. It's a shame they don't have any plain ones. You can actually use the attributes map brush to draw plain colors. The problem there is you can't do it over a texture, so you can't see your satellite texture while you're drawing, which makes it kind of pointless. Alright, so what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go, as you can see, the layer's not the full size, so I'm going to go Tools, I'm going to go Layer, Layer to Image Size. Okay, now we have an image that is 2048 by 2048. I am then going to make a new layer, the new layer button. I'm going to choose the black color to fill. We're going to fill that, and I'm just going to right click on that top layer and merge down. Now that's made it obvious that there's quite a few more bits that we need to get rid of, and to do that I'm going to get the black, I'm going to get the paintbrush. We're going to go for something like this, and I'm just going to draw away, need more opacity, I'm just going to draw away all these bits that we don't want. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is make this completely black and white, because we don't want this kind of snow texture that we've got here. So to do that I'm going to go Colors, Brightness, Contrast. We're going to turn the brightness up, and then we're going to turn the contrast up, and basically what that does is raise the white and raise the black level to the point where we are just left with white and black. We don't want to do it too extreme, because if you do, you end up with some very sharp edges and eventually you're just completely out. As you bring the brightness down, you can see what it's doing. That's high contrast. Yeah, so basically you want to find a balance. In this case, I'd say about 50 of each kind of works, so we'll go with that. So OK, and now we have this, and then what I'm going to do is go colors, color to alpha, and in the middle of this color to alpha box you get to pick what color you want to make transparent. So I'm going to choose black, press OK, OK again, and now we're left with what looks like our original grass mask, but in this case it's kind of a new grass mask that encompasses our old one. So if I copy this now, Control C, we go to our original grass mask, and I'm going to go Edit, Paste as New Layer in Place. You'll see what it's doing. So it's neatened up a lot of the edges. It's added a lot more area, and generally speaking, this will be a really, and this is going to be a much more accurate mask for coming up to the edge of the track where we want it, all of that kind of good stuff. So that should do us really nicely. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to take all of the green. So the green and these areas here, which we put in afterwards, the paths and the bits of the mask that we want to cut away. And to do that, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to select by colour, because this is quite a vivid green. I think this should work okay. There we go. So if I click the green, you'll see it's selected basically everything we want. Now, it will get a few more bits here and there, so you can try turning the threshold down a bit and see if you can get away with that. But you might start losing out in the middle of some of these green areas. So I want the threshold up just a little bit more. So that looks good. And it looks like we've pretty much got everything we want right there. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go Edit, Paste as New Layer in Place. Same as we did before. I'm going to disable the background, unselect, and this time I'm going to go Colors, Brightness and Contrast. I'm going to turn the brightness all the way down, and I'm going to turn the contrast all the way up, and that should make it black. We'll go Layer to Image Size. Now we've got a full 2048 by 2048 image of the areas we want to cut away from our mask. I'm going to copy that. We'll go over to our mask layer, and I'm going to Edit, Paste as New Layer in Place. And now you can see that these are all the areas we need to chop away. There's a couple of ways of doing this. The first one is we could merge this down and then make black the alpha, so it make black transparent using color to alpha. The other way is we could get the magic wand and we could select the black areas like that, and then we could make the layer transparent, move down to the one underneath and press Control X to cut, and then move down to the one underneath that and Control X to cut. Now that has done, I think, what we want to do, but to make sure, I'm going to do the other way as well. So we'll just merge this down, and we'll merge that layer down, so we're flattening absolutely everything, and then we're going to go Colors, Color to Alpha, choose the black. There we go. So two methods there that you can get rid of that that are worth experimenting with. You tend to find little tricks like that that work for you, and then you kind of do that all the time, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose, they both work. So one other thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to finish this mask off, because I couldn't be bothered to do it all in L3DT, it was taking a long time. So I'm just going to select white as the colour, I'm going to add a new layer, and we're going to up the brush size, and I'm just going to get rid of all this empty space over here and fill it with grass, because to be honest, I'm not going to model a lot of this off-track area. You've got houses up here and little villages. I think we're going to do some trees, and if there's anything that really stands out from the track up here, then obviously I'll model that, but generally speaking, it's just going to be trees and grass off-track, which is absolutely fine for the kind of track that we're doing right here. Alright, so that will probably do, although there will also be some grass over in this area here. If we take a look, Right here we've got a road, and we've got some fields and stuff, and a bridge on the other side. We will look at getting to that. Right now it's not massively important for the sake of the tutorial. That's something I can do in my spare time. Alright, so I'm going to merge that layer down, and this is over our grass mask, so I'm just going to go File, Overwrite Grassmask.tga. Okay, so now we've got a new height map and we've got a new grass mask. I'm going to go run map.bat and we'll check that out in map view and see what we've got. Okay, so just having a quick look around, forgetting the fact that the textures used actually don't look that great themselves, because we've got the repetitions too low and we've not got a lot of detail. Let's have a little explore and see what we can see that's different. So for a start, the grass on the edges of these sections is looking a lot tighter. This path is looking a lot better. We've got this road up here that's looking a lot better. This looks great coming up here. Alright, when you're up the top here, the road now meets with the level area. You've got the hill on the other side of the road like in real life. You've got grass on the back side of the berm, as in real life, but not on the front. You've also got grass on the right hand side now, just here, which we didn't have before. So that'll help aiming up for coming down here. Alright, we've got grass in the middle there, that's nice. We've got this bit in the middle that looks like it does in real life, and it goes all the way up to the top here. That's fantastic. Coming down, this looks much better. We've got the grass up the side of this jump very tight to the edge. They're a bit too fast. Just like in real life, we've got much tighter grass on the side there. That looks a lot better. This path's looking alright. It's nice and flat. So coming up the hill, you've got kind of a sandy runoff on each side. You've got the grass tight. You've got this kind of sandy area on the right that we have in real life. Looking down there, that path is looking really nice. Up and over this jump, you've got the grass really nice and tight up to the sides. All of this would have been very difficult to do by looking at the height map and doing the textures directly onto the height map as a guide. At least when you do it in L3DT in 3D, you really got an idea of exactly where that texture is going to sit when it's running game. So hopefully you guys will find this a very useful step. Although it can be time consuming, I'd say it's well worth it. So let's have a look at this, because we made some significant changes to kind of the scale of the off track right here, and that's really looking quite good. It definitely drops away down there. Now I didn't do that specifically to satellite kind of data, because I didn't think it was that necessary. It's an off track area, but that does to me look like it really does drop off enough, and it's level with the ground down the bottom. And it would be cool to put some trees in there, make the ground a bit more patchy, and see what it looks like. This area right here looks cool. You've got kind of the sandy bit at the bottom, and much tighter up here. Got a bit of path that joins the track down the side. Nothing really that side like there is in real life, but a bit of grass on this side of the jump. All the way down, you've got this path on the right that now looks really cool. It looks like it was man-made and you know, kind of level, because like I said, not all paths are level, but making it level definitely makes it look like a man-made path, and less of a kind of like it's painted on but it's not actually there. So this really gives it some kind of realism. This path is going to need finishing off at some point, but to be honest, all of this off track up here is a bit of a mystery to me right now, so I'm just focusing on the main areas. You've got this bit of path that runs off to the right. Again, it's nice and level, and you can see the grass rises either side of it, like the path has genuinely been carved out of the landscape, which is really the kind of look that we're going for. And that's about it. So all in all, I think that was well worth doing. It's something I do every time I make tracks. Every time, without fail, I'll go around and I'll do this. So I think the next thing to do is to take a look at our repeated textures, and we're going to try and figure out whether there's a kind of point where they look a bit better, because I think the actual texture itself doesn't look too bad with the repetitions that we have, but the normal map definitely could do with more, because as you can see, it's very chunky in places, and we also need to look at making this grass a little bit patchier too. So let's start with doing a bit of repetition work and see if we can kind of fix the way this looks. Alright, so let's go to our maps folder. Now remember, we've got these layers here which don't require masks because they're just for depth. The very top layers we have are sand, and alright, so it appears that we don't actually have a grass shader. Okay, so I'm going to copy the sand shader and I'm going to rename it grass.shd. Okay, so let's take a look at the grass shader, and we'll take a look at the sand shader, and we also want 4, 3, 2 and 1. Alright, so let's start with the grass because that's at the very top. It's probably okay for this to be a little coarser, so I'm going to put this repetition on 60 and we'll leave it there. The sand, I'm going to want that to be a lot finer, so I'm going to put that on 90. And now our track levels going down, so that it's kind of a, you know, as you ride a track, say it's been turned, it's going to be very coarse on top, but the more you compress the dirt within the ruts, the finer it's going to become, or the finer it's going to look because it's going to be compressed. So I'd be tempted to make our top layer, which is, let me just open the Heightmap and THT files so I can double check this. It's been a while since I've touched them. So the HMF and the THT. So our top layer, the one you're going to see first, is 1, and then we go down and 4 is the bottom. So I'd be tempted to make 1 more of a coarse kind of, you know, I still want it finer than what we have at the moment, so I'm going to make it 70. And then I'd go 2 would be 80, 3 would be 90, and 4 would be 100 repetitions. Because that way, the further down you go, the finer the soil will look. Just as an idea anyway, as something to try. So we've got 60 for grass, 90 for our sand, and then we have our progressively different soil layers. So I'm going to run map.bat and check those out and see what we look like. So remember, what we've done here is we've not so much changed the repetitions of the texture itself, but we've changed the repetitions of the normal map. And as you can see, that's made a real big difference to how it looks. So the normal map is a lot finer, which means the soil itself underneath will look a lot finer. And that will make it look a lot more realistic. So I think the next thing we need to look at is the colour palette, because a lot of tracks are different and it's very easy to get stuck using the same kind of colours for each kind of soil, sandy, grass track. Alright, so let's take a look at some other footage and see what we've got. So as well, it's going to really depend on what kind of time of year. This is a real good example of the kind of thing I wanted to see. So it looks like the grass is probably a little bit lusher than what we have. Our grass is very kind of, I don't really know the right word for it. So we're going to sort that out. Let's make that a little bit lusher, a little bit lighter with a little bit more saturation. The track surface itself probably has a little bit more light orange in it than we have, and the sand is definitely a lot lighter than what we have. So although we're not far off, we could definitely do making some adjustments. Now this is a very gradual process, and you have to be very careful when you do this, because if you change one color too much, it's really going to stick out compared to all the others. So let's start by loading everything. So we want 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we want sand, and we want grass. Right, so for a start, let's sort our grass out. Now we can use this tile as a repeat, or we can find a new one. This one's worked for me for quite a lot of tracks. I think it's quite a good grass tile, so I'm going to stick with it for this one. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to take a print screen of this video right here, because I really like the way this looks, and I'm going to go to GIMP and I'm going to paste it as a new image, and then we can use this as a reference and an overall color guide to go from. So we want to get our grass looking kind of similar to that, so there's a couple of ways we can do it. The first one I'd probably recommend doing is just adjusting the hue and saturation, because saturation can make a massive difference. You see, just like that, turning the saturation up by 50 points has made a massive difference to how that looks. If you turn the preview off and on, you'll see a big change. And comparing it to this grass right here, it's looking a lot closer. So saturation up by 50 was quite good. You can change the lightness, but you have to be very careful, because not only do you change the lightness of the overall color, but you're also changing the lightness of all the shaded parts, and that makes a big difference to how it looks too. So I'm going to leave the lightness on 0. Hue is something that you want to change by a very small amount. Probably use the mouse wheel, because if you go too far, you've got kind of dead grass, which is too much red, and if you go too far this way, you've got artificial grass, too much blue. So I'd say in this case we probably want a little bit more on the red side, so use the mouse wheel, bring it down by a very small amount, probably too much. Try a bit of blue if that doesn't work, and if nothing's right, put it back to 0, because in this case I think 0 was working quite nicely. So saturation, we'll put that to 50. And what is also important to do with grass is you want your 3D grass too, so grass FX. And we want to do exactly the same thing to this. So colors, hue saturation. In fact, you can load the previous use at the top here in the presets drop down by the date. So the latest one will be the one that we just did, so that will up it by 50. And then we're going to go File, Overwrite Grass FX. So we've done our grass, overwrite grass, we've done our grass FX, we've saved them both. So it'll be interesting to see what they now look like. Okay, so moving on. The sand actually looks way more like the on track in a lot of places. So what we're going to do for that is, first of all, we're going to look at our on-track texture, which I think needs a little bit more saturation as well. And then we are going to transfer some of that colour onto the sand. So whatever we want to do to this layer, we also want to do to this one, and this one in the same quantity. That way, as it digs down through the layers, it will be consistent in the shade. So I'm going to go Colour, Hue, Saturation. Let's have a look to see what the saturation does. For a start, I think maybe about 35 round about there seems to be doing the right kind of thing to that soil. Again, you can mess with the hue. You can make a massive impact to it with the hue, so be very careful with how much you adjust things by. See the difference there between, well, call it 0, and then using the clicker to go down. That's by -10, and that's made an absolutely massive difference. So I do think we need a little bit more red, so I'm going to move it down by 2 points. And again, we're going to leave the lightness alone, because as you do that, you also bring up the shading as well. So I'm going to set that back to 0. So I think that's probably good. We'll do that. We'll do it to the next one. So hue saturation, choose the last use. There we go. Overwrite that. Same again for this one. Hue saturation, drop down, last used, OK, overwrite. Same for this last one. Hue saturation, last used, OK, overwrite. Okay, so to bring some of that onto the sand, what I'm going to do is copy the top layer, Move over to the sand. First of all, I'm going to adjust the hue and saturation the same amount, just to make it consistent with everything else. And then I'm going to paste as a new layer. And then we're going to have an experiment of turning down the opacity. So let's try 50% for a start. We'll overwrite that. Because what that's going to do is bring some of that on-track colour into the off-track. So let's run map.bat and have a look where we are. Okay, so the grass definitely looks way more like what I'd want to see going off what we're doing here. I think actually the off-track sand is looking pretty close to what we want as well, but the on-track still looks a little bit strange compared to what we're looking at right here. So let's see if we can do a little bit more work on this. So I'm going to close. There we go. Right, so I think actually what we need is maybe a little bit more brightness. And to do that, I'm going to go brightness and contrast. Let's turn the brightness up by about 10. We'll turn the contrast up by about 15. That will also make it quite a lot richer. Let's go for 12. Let's try that. So overwrite that. I'm going to repeat the same process on all of these. Alright, that track surface is looking much better. It's looking brighter, it's got way more saturation, it's way richer than what we had before. So I think as far as colour palette goes, I'm quite happy with that. And of course, getting it into game and giving it a go in game will make a big difference to the way we feel about looking at it. So a couple of points to note. The first one is the fade between the on-track and the off-track now looks really quite good. I'd say if anything, we might want to up the repeated normals on the sand off-track, but I think on-track it's looking about the right amount for kind of a turned track. The grass kind of matches the grass underneath it, which is very important for the 3D grass to look the same shade and kind of saturation as the grass texture beneath it. So overall, I'm really happy with that. So I'm just going to increase the normal repetition on the sand. So we want to go to the sand SHD, and I'm going to change that to 120. Okay, so now as you can see, the sand looks actually finer than the soil on the track. The difference between this and this, which is great. I'm actually tempted to up the repeat on the sand a little bit more, but let's leave it at that for now and see how that goes. The next thing that I wanted to touch on was, a few things that we can do with the masks to really get the most out of them. Because masks can be way more than just solid black, solid white kind of sections of, your track can be way more than just the divide between this and this. So let's take a look at some of the tricks that I normally use to achieve a little bit more realism from these kind of masks. So I think this is a great area to start looking at right here. If we go and check out the GoPro footage and we zoom along to this area, let's just come back a bit. Alright, so here we go. So this section right here, you can see the grass doesn't just start and stop. You've got little patchy bits, you've got gaps, as you do in real life. Just here as well, on the right hand side, especially noticeably right here, you've got tufts. I normally kind of try and achieve that with the eraser brush. Now I'll always make a duplicate of my layer and turn the original one off just so I've got a backup. There's a really cool texture brush in GIMP called, see if I can find it, called Splats. Now what Splats does is it generates lots of different shapes every time you press every time you click. So every time I use it, if I just demonstrate over here, it's gonna generate different shapes. So that looks, there's no uniformity there whatsoever. So you can get some really cool effects going, and it looks very natural. So let's just undo all of that. So I tend to find that I use this quite often when I want to create an effect like the grass, kind of patchy grass areas. You want to turn the size down small enough not to interfere with areas you don't want to affect. But right here's like I said, this is a really good place to start. One other thing I'm going to do as well for this, I'm going to go over to our height field and I'm just going to export it as an image. And the reason for that is we can use it as a bit of a template to figure out where we are on the track. So we want to export active map layer, and I'm going to choose PNG. We're going to resize for export. I'm going to resize to 2048 because that's the size of our textures, and I'm going to call it Heightmap guide. Okay. So if we go File, Open, Heightmap guide, we can then copy that, go back to our grass mask, and I'm going to go Edit, Paste as, New Layer, shove it underneath so you can just about see through the grass mask. And then if you need to figure out where you are, okay, so we can turn it off. We can see underneath this tabletop, this single on the corner, and we know this area is the area we want to chip into. So I'll switch the mask back on, get the eraser, we'll get the splats, and we will just kind of chip in like so. And it doesn't matter if you overlap a little bit into the other side like that because it's realistic. Grass is not something that just grows uniformly everywhere. So I'm actually going to do a bit up here as well, because when we're watching the video, we pull back a little way to before this jump, it's also patchy on the right leading up to it. So again, leading up to this jump, you've got patchy sections on the right. So I'm going to go around and I'm just going to chip away at this grass layer in areas that I feel, watching the video, are going to have a big impact visually into how it looks. And I'll speed that up, and then we'll take a look at it afterwards and see what we're left with. Right, one little tip. If you want to section a little bit off so you can affect something that's very close to another area but without affecting the neighbouring area, just section it off with a select box, draw a lasso around it, double click to activate it, and then get your eraser and go for it. Just make sure you have feather edges off, otherwise there will be a bit of bleed and it won't look that great. So this bit I've noticed in this video right here, the guy goes over this big double. The side of that double is significantly patchy, I'm guessing because that double's not there all the time, so it's never a consistent bit of ground, so the grass kind of grows as and when it can. Whereas the bit on the other side, from most videos, there is a bit more grass on this side because it's a bit more of a consistent bit of track. So we'll do a bit of both, but the majority of this side is going to be eaten away a little bit more. Same goes for this side here. Right, back to it. Alright, so this might actually be a bit too much, or it might be not enough. There's only one way to really tell, and that's to experiment, have a go. You've got it roughly, or we've got it roughly to kind of how the track is in real life. Of course, a lot of that's going to depend on what time of year it is, all that kind of stuff. So let's give this a go. So I'm just going to file, export, overwrite the grass mask. We do have a backup layer right there at the bottom if we want to revert, so that's safe. And let's have a look. Right, this is starting to look very cool. It's given it some real feeling. It's given it some, you know, kind of like a realistic kind of vibe of the grass has actually worn away in some spots. It's exactly what I was going for. And the important thing about grass is not to use too much in the way of fades, because you know what you've got here is you've got a texture under the 3D grass clump. Now if that texture fades, the 3D grass won't fade so easily. It's going to look real strange. You want kind of hard edges. In this case, kind of like what we have here is okay, but what I'm going to make this a little bit better in a minute. But what we don't want is like right here, where we have this kind of faded grass underneath the 3D grass, because it just looks a little bit strange, especially the closer you get to it. So anyway, let's continue exploring this. This is looking to be pretty much exactly what I was hoping it would be. So I'm very happy with how it's turned out. What it's done as well is it's given the track a little bit of breathing room from the grass. Alright, so I'm very happy with that, how that's turned out. I think we could probably do a little bit more around this area. So I'm just going to finish off this a little bit. Okay, right, so I'm going to apply the same thing to this spot here, because this spot's going to be largely kind of wooded as well. So for this I'm actually going to up the size quite a lot. And we're going to start taking some quite large chunks out, but that's going to be fine. In a wooded area, you know, you get these kind of patchy grass spots, especially when the woods are very light, as they are in this kind of spot. So that should work quite nicely for that. So one thing we're going to do as well is, now I'm happy with this, I'm going to duplicate it to keep a backup of the version we did like. What we're going to do is we're going to adjust some of these edges where a lot of this is quite blurry and soft. We want to get rid of as much of that as possible. So to do that, I'm going to make a new layer underneath it. We're going to make that layer black, so I'm going to fill it with black, and we're going to merge it down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the brightness and contrast, and we're going to up the contrast until basically what we're doing is getting rid of a lot of these soft edges. So as you can see, the lower the contrast, the softer everything is. The higher the contrast, the more it is just what we're going for, basically a black and white image. So we're going to OK that. Now another thing we can also do to get rid of a lot of these little specks, because we don't want too many of these little specks, is we can go filters, generic, dilate. That's going to push the white out, and then we can go filters, generic, erode to pull the white back. So what that's effectively going to do is make a lot of these hard patches hard, and a lot of the tiny, minute little areas disappear. So then we're going to go colors, color to alpha. We're going to get rid of that black, just like that. And then we're going to re-export our grass mask. And let's check that out. Alright, so that's now looking really what I was going for, where it genuinely does look now like the grass has just some areas where it's not grown as much as others, some areas where it won't grow because of the soil, the way the soil's been dug and moved, and that's ideal. This is really what we want. Now, one thing we need to do to make that look a lot better is going to involve the sand mask. So if we go over to GIMP again and we open up our sand mask, which is there, there's two things we need to do. The first one is we're going to blur this out, and the reason is we made this very kind of noisy and rough, which we now don't want because of the way the texture is. So what I'm going to do is make a duplicate of that, same as I have been doing before, and I'm going to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, which is going to up this something a little bit more like that. And the reason for that is tracks are naturally a little bit lighter towards the edges because they're harder to turn by the edges. People tend to ride quite centrally a lot of the time. Generally speaking, they can be a little bit lighter towards the edges, so that's the kind of look I'm going for there. Now the second thing I'm going to do, because remember what this sand mask is doing is it's stopping us from seeing the track layer everywhere. Basically the track layer is the next layer down, so anything where this sand mask has a cutout is going to show the track. We want to bring a little bit of that through into the grassy areas as well. So I'm going to copy our entire grass mask now that I'm roughly happy with it, and I'm going to paste it as a new layer on top of our sand mask, and we're going to use it to cut away very slightly and blur to give the grass a little bit of a shadow, which is kind of a cool trick. So let's turn the sand mask off so we can just see the grass. To do this, I'm going to invert the color so it's black. Alright, and I'm going to make a new layer underneath it, which is white, and we're going to merge it down so it has a white background. Make sure we're 100% white. So layers merge down. Okay, and then what I want to do actually is I want to cut away the black areas. And I want the black areas to be just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go filters, generic. I'm going to go erode to make the black grow a little bit. And then we're going to go colors, color to alpha. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of the white because it's the black we want to keep. Alright, now I'm going to use the select by color tool. We're going to feather edges very slightly, and we're going to pick all the black. Now I'm going to make that layer disappear a little bit. I'm going to turn that layer off. I'm going to turn the sand mask layer back on, our duplicate, and I'm also going to duplicate our sand mask. So we've got two. We'll turn the bottom one off for now. This top one, I'm going to press Ctrl X to cut, and what that's going to do is it's going to cut away all the areas where the grass shows through. So technically you'll be able to see through the sand mask now in these areas. You'll be able to see the track underneath the grass instead of the sand underneath the grass. But I'm going to turn the sand mask underneath it back on, and I'm going to bring the opacity down probably to about 60%. So what that's going to do is it's going to give a little bit of a shadow underneath all the grassy areas. Might need to bring it down a little bit more. Let's try 55. So I'll export that as our sand mask. So file, export, file, overwrite. And let's run map.bat and take a look, see what it's done. Alright, so as you can see now, as faint as it looks in some spots, others it actually looks way more obvious. You've got this kind of faded shadow effect coming from all the grassy areas, which we might actually intensify a little bit, but maybe not very much. And what we've also done is we've blurred the sand mask instead of having it so rough. So the edges of the track where you've got grass either side now looks a lot more natural, the way it transitions from the edges into the track surface. So yeah, I think what I'd actually like is a little bit more shadow, although that's very cool as it is. So to do that, we're going to go back to GIMP, and I'm just going to lower the opacity to, let's say, 35, so we're taking 20% off, and we'll overwrite again, and let's check that out. This might be too dark, might be too obvious. If it is, we can pull it back a bit, but you've got that control because everything is on an individual layer at the moment. And there's nothing stopping you saving these as as GIMP XCF files that allow you to save the layered image, and that way if you change your mind later you can always adjust it and then re-export over your TGA mask. Personally I don't tend to do that so much, but then I spend, I'm quite used to doing this. I get it where I like it and then I know it's going to be good from there. Alright, so this is a bit more obvious, which looks pretty cool. I'm very happy with that. You tend to find the ground under grass is probably a bit softer, a bit maybe more moist than the grass that gets baked, than the ground that gets baked, that doesn't have the grass for kind of protection. So the soil is naturally always going to be a little bit darker underneath the grass, and I think that just adds a real element of realism to it, which is what we're going for, right? So I'm very happy with that. And lastly, the last thing I'm going to do in this tutorial for these textures is we're going to, first of all, I'm going to merge these down as one, and then I'm going to duplicate it so I've got a backup. That's the last one I'm happy with again. And I'm going to take the eraser, we're going to keep it on splats, although I mean we could pick a different one. That's splats 2, we could pick splats 1. They do very similar things. We're going to up the size so it's relatively large. We're going to lower the opacity, and I'm going to chip away at some of these sandy spots. In fact, I think I prefer splats 2 for this, which is why I was using it. Very slightly like this. And what that's going to do is it's going to give it a real natural kind of look, because the way we have it at the moment is very tiled. Sand in real life is not. It's rough, it's got different colours in it, it's got different look to it. It isn't just one consistent kind of material, so this gives it a bit more of a natural look. Because again, what we're doing is wherever we erase this, basically all it's going to do is it's going to show whatever's underneath, and in this case what's underneath is the track surface, so it's going to be darker. So wherever we do this is going to make it look more realistic. And I want you guys to experiment with this. I don't want you to just take this method and go, right, that's perfect. There's always going to be ways of doing things better. It's just figuring them out. This is, like I said, this is just the way I do it. So experiment, find out if there's a better way of doing it. I'd love to hear it if there is. Always up for figuring new methods out of doing this stuff. Okay, especially try and do this where it joins the track, which will give it a real cool kind of natural progression from track surface to lighter off-track surface. Whatever we're saying it's made of, sand or just lighter, more baked soil. Okay, I'm purposefully leaving this bit in the center for now, although I might just do the edge there, because this bit in the center is kind of a foundation for a building. Now the Heightmap needs adjusting for that in order to get it into Blender and be able to make that building well. So I'm purposefully kind of leaving this bit well alone at the moment, because I know that's going to be a useful spot to do a future tutorial for objects. Alright, I think that should probably do for this example, so I'm going to overwrite sand mask one more time, run map.bat, and let's check it out. And here we go. So as you can see now, the off-track sand has a little bit more of a natural look to it. Especially in places where you've got some elevation, like right here, and where it's kind of joining and merging with the track surface, it now looks kind of dirtier, so to speak, where it's kind of blended with the track surface a bit. There we go. as much as I like what we've done with the grass, I think I'd like to just pull the grass back in just a little bit to see more of the shadow underneath, and also to give the track a little bit more breathing room. So all I'm going to do for that is go right click on the layer, and I'm going to go add layer mask, and we're going to pick layers alpha channel, and then I'm going to right click that and show layer mask. Now that is basically your alpha mask, so your black is transparent, your white is whatever's visible. So if you had an image instead of just a white and black picture, you'd really get a better idea of what was going on. But the black is basically invisible. So what we're going to do with this is go filters, generic, erode, which is going to eat away the white a little bit. So that's pulled the grass back a little bit, and then I'm just going to, because what happens when you use dilate and erode is you tend to end up with these kind of blocky sections. So to fix that a little bit, I'm just going to go filters, noise, pick, and we're going to look at just kind of roughing the edge, not too much, nothing too extreme like this, but if we have a high repeat with a low randomization, then we end up just roughing up the edges. So we'll do that. And then you can do two things. You can either leave this mask on while you're making changes, and you can make multiple changes and keep coming back and adjusting it. And to switch between the two, simply right click the layer and choose show layer mask, and that will stay there, so you can edit that whenever you want. Or you can just right click and apply layer mask, which flattens it into the image. So we're going to overwrite the grass mask and take a look at that. And I think that's a little bit better. So what we've done there, you can really see that it's pulled it back a little bit from the edges of the track, which means we can see a little bit more of the lightness, especially on the sections which are edged with grass like this. It's really kind of pulled it back down from the edges of the jump, which is nice. And I think that generally looks a lot better. Also on these sections right here, you can see a lot more of the shadow underneath, which I think looks pretty good. So all in all, very happy with that. Okay, so one thing I'm also going to do really quickly is just kind of try and define the difference between the sand that's on the track areas and the off-track sand. And to do that, I'm going to go to I've brought in a new image, so I'm bringing in this new texture map, which is one of our pictures we used as an overlay for the grass mask, I believe. I'm going to go to my texture map brush 3D, and I'm going to select Arctic snow, same as before. Okay, now we are going to look at areas such as this down here, where it's actually getting quite difficult to tell the difference between the sand by the edge of the track and the sand on the floor. So basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw around some of these berms like this, and I don't want to get any on the track, but what I do want to do is cover kind of the sides wherever there's kind of a slope. Alright, I think that covers most of the real problem areas. So what we'll do with this is I'm going to export the active map layer, PNG, stick it in our Majora folder, and I'm going to call it TMB edges for texture map brush edges. So into GIMP, open our TMB edges file. I'm going to do exactly what I did earlier, which is we're going to select these areas using the select by color tool. You might need to turn the threshold up until you get everything you want. Okay, that's looking good. I do have some unwanted bits and bobs here and there, but nothing that's going to cause a real issue. Okay, one thing I'm going to do as well before I do this is I'm just going to adjust the brightness and contrast, because a lot of this white is being missed out because of the way it's drawn, because of the quality of the texture map brush. So sometimes it's a little bit of a pain trying to capture this stuff properly, but that looks pretty good right there. So I'm just going to get rid of all that unwanted stuff again. Right, so I'm going to copy that. We're going to go over to our sand mask, and I'm going to go edit, paste as new layer in place. Now straight away what that's done is it's added these areas to our sand mask. Now there's a couple of ways we could do it. The first one is we could try it with using these as additionals, which would make these areas very sandy, but it would make them stand out as being quite different from the rest of the areas. And that might actually work quite nicely, but I think what I'm going to do is try and extract these areas first, because personally I think that's going to make more of a difference. So to do that, I'm going to select them all. I'm going to hide the layer. We'll go to our original one. I'm going to duplicate it and then press Ctrl X to cut. So that's now cut those areas away from the sand mask, which will basically make them show the track texture, which we don't 100% want because this is off track. I'm going to reintroduce the layer. We'll duplicate it so we've got a backup. And then I'm going to first of all go blur, Gaussian blur. This filters blur, Gaussian blur to kind of blur it out slightly like that, which should make it a lot softer. Okay, and then we'll turn the opacity down on that as well. Hopefully what that will do will give it some definition to each edge, top and bottom of the berms for example, and also maintain some of that sand texture in the middle, make it look more like a slope. So let's export that, overwrite sand mask, and let's give that a go, see what it looks like. Alright, so straight away I can tell that this has made a massive difference right here. So what it's done is first of all it's given the track width a little bit more definition to the way the jump's been built up there, which is great, and it's given it a defined edge all the way down. Same for the back side of this berm, it's made it actually look more like a built up berm rather than just a bit of blurry sand, which is exactly what we wanted. What else? So the takeoff and the corners up here. It's made a big difference to that corner, that looks a lot better. I think this hill looks a lot better, and the side of this jump as well. But one thing I do feel is that this is a little bit too much. it's letting a little bit too much of the surface blow through. So we can turn the opacity back up on that for a start. So I think maybe something like that should be good. And another thing we can do as well, don't forget, is because we can draw on this and we can use the eraser. We can actually blend that into the off-track bits a little bit better as well. So that's definitely something that I'd consider doing. Alright, so I'm just going to have a little play with this and see if I can get it to a kind of the effect that I was going for. Okay, I am going to use the splats brush with a fairly low opacity, definitely a low size, and I'm just going to kind of work away at some of this towards the bottom of these areas, because I kind of want them to blend in to the surroundings a little bit more. Don't think it's so much a problem down the bottom there. Okay, let's give that a try. So what I've done there is I've made the percentage of blur slightly lower and turned up the opacity slightly so it doesn't let so much of the track surface through from beneath. Okay, right away that looks a lot better. Right there, I believe it does the job of giving the track a bit more of an edge, but it doesn't make it look too unrealistic. These berms over here were great anyway, I think. They're pretty good. Okay, I'm much happier with that. I think that looks a lot better. Alright, so I've loaded in our texture map one more time. Because what I'm going to do now is go back to our texture map brush. I'm going to stick it on, again, Arctic snow, and I'm now just going to pick out some details that we want to highlight a little bit, because it's kind of very difficult at the moment to pick line choice. And this is going to be added to our light mask. The reason for that is at the moment our light mask, our sand mask, is kind of acting as a bit of a detail mask. So we can use it to highlight kind of hard packed areas. So for example, not only can we use it to highlight sections like this, but we can also use it to highlight the tops of berms, just to make them stand out a little bit better. Okay, so something like that's going to probably do for this example. Doesn't take a huge amount just to kind of make a big difference to what we're seeing in game. So let's go ahead and export that. So File, Export, Active Map Layer. I'm going to choose PNG and I'm going to call it TMB Highlights. Now back into GIMP. I'm going to open our TMB Highlights. We'll head over to our sand mask and I'm going to edit, paste as, new layer in place. And then I'm going to go layer, layer to image size. Now as you can see, that's very crudely kind of put this stuff on our sand mask, which is going to show up, because it's the top layer, it's going to show up very light. What I'm going to do with that is, first of all, I'm going to give it a little Gaussian blur. Not a lot. Maybe 1. That should do it. We're going to turn the opacity down a little bit just so it blends a little bit better. And then we're going to get the eraser. We're going to use the circle, the regular brush, turn the size down, leave the opacity down. Just kind of try and blend that in as best you can. You know, fade in the run up like that. Fade out the runoff like that. We want to basically do this everywhere. Something like that. So let's export our sand mask and we'll give it a go. Okay, so areas like this, I think it will make a big improvement to picking a line. As you can see, it's just ever so slightly lighter on the kind of the harder packed surfaces. So over there, and that will leave a nice deformation groove in there as well. Over the hard pack, and it kind of highlights that inside line as well, and it gives some definition to the berm on the outside. Same up here, we've got a bit more definition on the outside of the berm. It kind of highlights a bit of a hard pack lip. It definitely looks like harder surface, but it definitely gives a big bit of definition between a takeoff and the rest of the track, which should make it a lot more interesting to ride. Although I think some of them are a little bit too obvious. That is looking a bit better. So not as obvious. For these split lanes right here, I think it will help a lot. It's definitely given us kind of a hard pack top to that roller, and it's over here has really defined the inside line. And obviously this will look quite different in game as well. But that should help us out quite a lot. Alright, so let's give this a go in game. Alright, let's see what we got. So I think straight away it's very obvious that the colours have made a massive difference. The grass actually seems really vivid. The off-track areas look really good. that path is it adds a lot more kind of realism to it. The way the sand blends in with the track texture is very nice. And one thing that's really going to make this as well really stand out a lot more is the track deformation, because when that really starts to build up, that's when you really notice, you know, the kind of the on-track detail, because we haven't really added a lot of that. In fact, we haven't really added any of that to the track as it stands. So I don't know whether this is coming across in the video as well, but where the track has deformed, well, it genuinely looks a little bit more compact because it's finer. It's very hard to kind of see that really, but playing it's kind of different. I love coming up the hill and over into that big floaty tabletop. Feels really satisfying to hit. Nice big whips over it as well. Alright, this is another section that's changed, especially with how far down it is compared to where it was, and that again, that looks really cool. Look even better with some trees over it and a lot of tree shadows, that kind of thing. So there you have it. Really, I hope that texturing tutorial has been helpful to a lot of people. This is pretty much what I tend to do most of the time. So hopefully that's been really helpful to you guys. As I said last time, if there's anything you guys want to see, please let me know in the comments, because I am looking at doing some shorter tutorials on things like sky domes, rotating objects, all that kind of stuff. If there's anything specific like that that you'd love to get in a little short one-off tutorial, just let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to do my best at making something like that for you guys. Other than that, I'm actually going to put a download link in the comments of this video, and you guys can download this track and run some laps on it and see what you think, get a first-hand impression. Again, I'd also love to get some feedback on that in the comments section, so if you guys would be willing to give it a go and let me know what you think, either here or on the forum, preferably on YouTube, because I'm really trying to you know, build some interaction with you guys on here. And yeah, that's about it. So if you enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you want to keep up to date with more of these tutorials, then please subscribe. And I will catch you guys later.